The air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning metal. Explosions echoed in the distance, their vibrations trembling through the wreckage where Irina lay trapped. Her silvery gray skin was lacerated with cuts, the metallic sheen dulled by dust and blood. One of her long, pointed ears had been partially torn, and a piece of shrapnel had lodged deep in her thigh. The battle had been fierce. Her unit of Othali fighters had engaged the human forces at the edge of the contested zone, a stretch of land both species claimed. They'd been outmaneuvered. What was supposed to be a strategic offensive turned into a desperate retreat when human reinforcements arrived unexpectedly from the eastern ridge. Irina's ship had been hit during the withdrawal. As she spiraled toward the surface, she'd watched the remaining Othali vessels disappear into the upper atmosphere, leaving trails of blue exhaust against the amber sky. They hadn't waited for her. Couldn't wait. It was protocol. No delays during retreat, no rescue attempts when under heavy fire. Now, as she lay in the wreckage of her craft, the comm unit on her wrist blinked feebly. She raised it to her lips, wincing at the pain that shot through her torso. This is Scout Commander Irina Voss, requesting emergency extraction. Position. She glanced at the coordinates displayed on the cracked screen. Sector 7, Quadrant 18. Downcraft. Severe injuries. Requesting immediate assistance. Only static answered her. She repeated the message, adding, "Any Othali vessel in range, please respond." Nothing. The comm unit's light blinked 3 times in rapid succession, then went dark. Battery dead, or perhaps the transmitter had finally given out. It didn't matter which. The result was the same: silence. Abandonment. Irina let her arm fall limply to her side. Above her, through the shattered canopy of her ship, she could see the sky darkening as night approached. Stars were beginning to appear, distant pinpricks of light, cold and uncaring. How strange to think that among those countless stars, the conflict between humans and Othali was nothing but an insignificant flicker, a momentary disruption in the vastness of space. A sharp pain from her wounded leg brought her back to her immediate reality. The shrapnel had torn through muscle and was likely pressing against an artery. Without proper medical attention, she would bleed out within hours. Her emergency medkit had been crushed in the crash. So this was how it would end. Not in glorious combat, but slowly bleeding to death in the wreckage of her own ship, far from home, forgotten by her people. Irina closed her eyes, forcing herself to accept the inevitability of her fate. There was no point fighting it. The Othali had a saying, "Face death as you would face a worthy opponent, with dignity and without complaint." She tried to think of her home world, the crystal spires of the capital city catching the light of the twin moons, the vast purple oceans, the mountain ranges where she'd trained as a young cadet. At least her memories would die with her, not captured and extracted by human interrogators. As consciousness began to slip away, Irina thought she heard something, a rhythmic sound, like footsteps squishing through mud. Probably just her imagination, her mind creating comforting illusions as death approached. She kept her eyes closed, allowing herself to drift. Then came a noise too distinct to ignore. Metal scraping against metal, followed by a grunt of effort. Someone was climbing over the wreckage of her ship. Irina's eyes snapped open, her hand instinctively reaching for the blaster at her side, only to find an empty holster. The weapon must have been thrown from the ship during the crash. A figure appeared at the edge of the shattered canopy, silhouetted against the darkening sky. Broad-shouldered, wearing a patched exosuit and a dented helmet. Unmistakably human. The figure paused, then reached up and removed the helmet. In the fading light, Irina could make out a face with sharp features, several days' worth of stubble, and alert eyes that widened slightly upon seeing her. A human male, somewhere in his 30s by their standards. His armor bore the insignia of the Earth Coalition forces, though it was partially obscured by what looked like hastily applied camouflage paint. Irina tensed, waiting for the inevitable. He would pull out a weapon and finish what the crash had started. Or worse, call for backup and have her taken for interrogation. Either way, She was defenseless. Instead, the human carefully climbed down into the cockpit, movements deliberate as he navigated the jagged metal. When he spoke, his voice was surprisingly gentle. "Well, this is awkward. I was hoping to find spare parts, not a half-dead alien warrior woman." He crouched beside her, eyes scanning her injuries. "Though I suppose this makes us even for that time your people shot down my squad over the eastern territories." Irina stared at him, uncomprehending. Why wasn't he killing her? The human reached toward her leg, and she flinched away instinctively, hissing in pain. "Easy," he said, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "That shrapnel needs to come out, or you'll bleed to death. I'm guessing that's not how you want to go, considering you've survived this long. Why would you help me?" Irina managed to ask, her translator implant converting her words to standard human English. The man shrugged. "Maybe I've gone soft. Or maybe it's because I'm stuck in this hellhole too, and misery loves company." He gave her a lopsided smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Name's Darius, by the way. Darius Cole, former lieutenant with the 47th Reconnaissance Division, currently AWOL and improvising survival." Irina didn't respond. The pain was becoming overwhelming, dark spots dancing at the edges of her vision. "Look," Darius continued, "I can leave you here to die, or I could try to help. Your choice. But decide quickly because you're losing a lot of blood, and I'd rather not have dragged myself through a kilometer of mud just to watch you expire." She wanted to refuse, to die with her pride intact rather than accept help from the enemy. But some deeper instinct, the will to survive that transcended species and conflict, made her nod weakly. "That's the spirit," Darius said, already reaching for a pouch at his belt. "Fair warning, this is going to hurt like hell." Those were the last words Irina heard before the pain overwhelmed her, and darkness claimed her consciousness. The first thing Irina became aware of was the soft hissing of a pressure seal, followed by the metallic taste of recycled air. She was inside some kind of shelter, not a medical bay, but not the wreckage of her ship either. Her eyes fluttered open to a dimly lit space. The walls a patchwork of salvaged metal panels, some bearing the insignia of human vessels, others stripped from derelict Othali crafts. It was a shelter cobbled together from battlefield debris, ingenious in its construction, yet utterly makeshift. Exposed wiring ran along the ceiling, connecting to a sputtering light source that cast the room in an unsteady glow. In one corner, a terminal blinked with incomprehensible data streams. Human coding merged with Othali interface systems in a way that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. When Irina tried to move, a sharp pain in her thigh reminded her of her injury. Glancing down, she saw that her leg had been treated. The shrapnel was gone, replaced by a bandage made from what appeared to be human medical supplies supplemented with a gelatinous Othali healing compound. Someone had known enough about Othali physiology to apply the correct treatment. A rare knowledge among humans. "Finally awake? I was starting to think you'd sleep through the apocalypse." The voice came from the far side of the shelter, where Darius sat hunched over a small cooking unit, stirring something in a dented metal pot. "Though given the state of things, you wouldn't have missed much." Irina tried to sit up, then fell back with a grunt of pain. "Where am I? What is this place?" Darius turned, giving her a wry smile. "Welcome to Casa del Darius, or, as I like to call it, how to repurpose your enemy's junk 101. He gestured around the shelter. "It's not exactly five-star accommodation, but keeps the rain out and the predators at bay mostly." He stood and walked over, carrying a small container of water. "Here, you need to hydrate. Othali metabolism runs hot when healing. Another fun fact they don't teach you in basic training." Irina accepted the water cautiously, sniffing it before taking a small sip. It tasted clean enough. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked, her voice rasping. "Why not just leave me to die?" "That's a good question," Darius said, returning to his cooking pot. "One I've been asking myself for the past 12 hours while you were unconscious. Maybe I'm just a sucker for lost causes. Or maybe I'm tired of watching things die in this war." He ladled some kind of stew into 2 bowls, then brought one over to her. "It's not poisoned, if that's what you're worried about." Just some local vegetation and protein supplements. Tastes like disappointed dreams and regret, but it'll keep you alive. Irina stared at the bowl suspiciously. What do you want from me? Information? Technology? Her hand instinctively moved to the neural implant at the base of her skull, a device containing sensitive Othali military data. Darius noticed the gesture and rolled his eyes. If I want to crack open your head for secrets, I would have done it while you were unconscious. Besides, I'm not exactly in a position to sell information to anyone. In case you missed the memo, I'm not exactly on speaking terms with my command structure right now. He sat on a crate opposite her, taking a spoonful of his own stew. As for what I want, he shrugged. Company, I guess. It gets lonely talking to yourself after a couple of weeks. Even an Othali makes for better conversation than the local wildlife. Irina narrowed her eyes, still uncertain. Everything she'd been taught about humans warned her against trust. They were deceptive, ruthless, willing to say anything to gain an advantage. Yet this human had saved her life when he could have easily taken it. You said you're AWOL? What does that mean? Absent without leave. Military speak for decided the war was bullshit and stopped showing up for work. Darius took another bite of stew. My transport got hit during a routine supply run. Pilot and 2 crew members died on impact. I managed to eject, but by the time any search parties came through, I was listed as Kia. Easier to stay dead than explain why I didn't immediately hike 80 kilometers through enemy territory to the nearest outpost. He gestured to her with his spoon. What about you? Your people don't usually leave their wounded behind. Very big on the whole honor and battle thing, for what I've seen. Irina looked away. Standard protocol during emergency withdrawal. No delays, no rescues. The mission takes priority over individual lives. Sounds familiar, Darius muttered. Different uniform, same bullshit. They ate in silence for a while, the only sound the occasional drip of water from somewhere in the ceiling and the distant rumble of thunder. Eventually, Irina spoke again. How'd you know how to treat my wound? The healing compound you used is Othali military grade. Darius shrugged. I wasn't always a pilot. Did a stint as a field medic early in the war. Treated a few Othali prisoners. You learn fast when someone's bleeding out in front of you, regardless of species. He nodded toward her leg. Found the compound in a crashed medical transport about a kilometer east. Figured it would work better than my limited human supplies. Irina nodded slowly, processing this information. Thank you, she said finally, the words feeling strange on her tongue. She couldn't remember the last time she'd thanked a human for anything. Darius looked surprised, then gave a small nod. You're welcome. Just don't make a habit of getting shot down in my neighborhood. I've only got so much of that healing goop. Before Irina could respond, a high-pitched whine cut through the air, the unmistakable sound of a drone's propulsion system. Darius's demeanor changed instantly, all humor vanishing from his expression. Don't move, he whispered, crossing quickly to a control panel. He flipped several switches, and the lights in the shelter went out, plunging them into darkness save for the dim glow of emergency backup power. What is it? Irina asked, though she already knew the answer. Search drone, Darius replied, his voice barely audible. They sweep this sector every few days. Usually just pass overhead, but occasionally they deploy ground units if they detect heat signatures or electronic signals. He moved to a view screen near the shelter's sealed entrance, checking a crude radar display. This one's flying lower than usual. Might have picked up something. Irina struggled to sit up, ignoring the pain in her leg. If it's Othali, I can identify myself and explain why you're holed up with a human deserter. Darius cut in. Besides, that's not an Othali drone. Wrong signature. It's one of ours. Human military, latest model. The kind that doesn't ask questions before deploying its payload. The whine of the drone grew louder, its shadow briefly visible through a small viewport as it passed overhead. Both of them held their breath, waiting. Then came the distinct sound of something mechanical landing outside. Ground unit, Darius whispered, reaching for a battered rifle propped against the wall. It'll start scanning for life signs. Irina's mind raced. Standard human drones would be calibrated to identify both human and Othali biological signatures, a survival mechanism for human soldiers and a hunting tool for Othali combatants. If it detected her, the response would be immediate and lethal. "Your scanner disruptor," she said suddenly. "Every human soldier carries one." Darius shook his head. "Lost it in the crash. Besides, it would only mask human signatures, not Othali." Irina reached for her wrist device. "Damaged, but not entirely dead. I might be able to use mine, but it needs power. More than what's left in the battery." Darius glanced at her device, then at his own equipment. "The emergency beacon in my pack has a compatible power cell. If we can jury-rig a connection, we need an adapter. Your technology and ours don't easily interface." Outside, they could hear the mechanical whirring as the drone began its scan. They had minutes at most. Darius moved quickly, grabbing the emergency beacon and bringing it to Irina. "You know Othali tech better than I do. Can you make this work?" Irina examined both devices, her mind calculating possibilities. "Maybe. Hand me that toolkit." As Darius passed her a small case of tools, their fingers briefly touched. There was a moment of strange connection. Two enemies working together against a common threat, their survival dependent on each other's skills. Irina worked quickly, using a small laser tool to carefully open both devices. "I need to connect the power source from your beacon to my disruptor's main circuit. The polarity is different, but if I can reverse the flow." Darius watched, impressed despite himself. "You're pretty good with tech for a scout commander. And you know too much about Othali physiology for a simple pilot," she replied without looking up. "I think we're both more than we claim to be." The drone outside emitted a high-pitched beep, the beginning of its scan sequence. "Whatever you're doing, do it faster," Darius urged. Irina connected the final wire, using a small piece of conductive material from Darius's beacon to bridge the gap between technologies. The disruptor flickered, then glowed with a soft blue light. "It's working," she whispered, "but the range is limited. It might not mask the entire shelter." Darius moved closer to her, bringing his rifle. "Then we focus it where we are. 2 targets, 1 shield." The drone's scan intensified, a beam of light visible through the viewport as it swept across the exterior of the shelter. Irina held the modified disruptor between them, its blue glow casting eerie shadows on their faces. They were close enough that Irina could feel Darius's breath, could see the tension in his jaw as he stared at the viewport, waiting. This close, he didn't look like the enemy she'd been trained to kill. He looked like a person, afraid, determined, alive. The scan passed over their position. For a heart-stopping moment, the light paused, as if the drone had detected something. Then it continued its sweep, completing the circle around the shelter. After what felt like an eternity, they heard the mechanical whir of the drone lifting off, the sound of its engines fading as it moved away. Darius exhaled heavily, lowering his rifle. "That was too close." Irina nodded, suddenly aware of how close they were still sitting. She moved away slightly, deactivating the disruptor. It worked. A human emergency beacon powering an Othali disruptor. "Ironic, isn't it?" Darius said, standing to restore power to the shelter. "Our technologies work better together than our species do." As the lights flickered back on, Irina saw the shelter with new eyes. It wasn't just a collection of salvage parts. It was a testament to survival, to adaptation. Human and Othali technologies merged to create something that neither could have built alone. "We should rest," Darius said, checking the radar once more. "The drone won't be back for another cycle, but you need to heal, and I need to resupply. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Irina nodded, settling back on her makeshift bed. As exhaustion overtook her, she found herself thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. She had closed her eyes expecting death, only to open them and find herself in the care of a human, the very enemy she'd been fighting for years. Perhaps survival wasn't just about physical endurance. Perhaps it was also about adaptation, about recognizing that sometimes help came from unexpected sources. As sleep claimed her, Irina wondered what other surprises this unusual alliance might bring. Morning came with the sound of rain pattering against the metal roof of the shelter. Irina woke to find herself alone, a note scrawled on a piece of salvaged material placed beside her bed. Gone hunting. Back soon. Don't touch the red button on the console. It's not connected to anything, but I like the suspense of pretending it might be. Despite herself, Irina felt a small smile tug at her lips. The human's irreverent humor was unexpected. Athali military culture valued stoicism and dignity. Humor, especially in dire situations, was considered a distraction at best, a weakness at worst. She took the opportunity to examine her wound. The healing compound had worked remarkably well. The gash was closing cleanly, with minimal scarring likely. She estimated another day of rest before she could move without risk of reopening the injury. Carefully, she tested her weight, wincing as pain shot through her leg. Functional, but not combat-ready. She hobbled around the small shelter, taking inventory of Darius's supplies and defenses. The place was a marvel of improvisation. Air filtration systems cobbled together from salvage parts. Water collection and purification using both human and Athali techniques. A security system that used motion sensors from an Athali scout ship connected to repurposed human military alerts. On a small workbench, she found something unexpected, a partially disassembled Athali communication device, far more sophisticated than what a typical scout would carry. Darius had been working on it, judging by the tools laid out beside it. What was a supposed transport pilot doing with advanced knowledge of Athali technology? The question reinforced her lingering suspicion. Perhaps his story of being stranded was true, but there was more to this human than he was revealing. The shelter door hissed open, and Darius entered, shaking water from a makeshift poncho. He carried a bag that appeared to contain local vegetation and what looked like a small animal carcass. "Breakfast of champions," he announced, holding up his catch. "Hope you like whatever the hell this is, because it's what was stupid enough to get caught in my trap." He paused when he saw Irina standing by his workbench. "I see you're feeling better." Also snooping. "Reconnaissance is what I do," she replied, gesturing to the communication device. "This is an officer-grade transmitter, not something a regular scout would carry." Darius set down his bag and removed his wet outer layer. "Found it in the same wreckage as the medical supplies. Thought it might be useful if I could get it working. And would you know how to use it if you did?" He met her gaze evenly. "I'm a quick study." The tension between them stretched for a moment before Darius broke it with a shrug. "Besides, it's not like I have anywhere to call. Your people would shoot me on sight, and mine think I'm dead." Speaking of communication, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, tossing it to her. Irina caught it reflexively, a power cell for her personal communicator. "Found it in an abandoned outpost about 2 clicks north," Darius explained, moving to prepare the food. "Figured you might want to call home eventually, though I'd appreciate a head start before you bring the Athali cavalry down on me." Irina turned the power cell over in her hands. With this, she could potentially contact an Athali ship, if anywhere in range. She could go home, return to her unit, resume her place in the war. But the thought brought less comfort than she expected. "Thank you," she said finally, tucking the cell in her pocket instead of immediately installing it. "Though I'm not sure anyone is listening for my signal anymore." Darius raised an eyebrow as he prepared their meal. The mighty Athali military, abandoning one of their officers? "I'm shocked. Shocked, I tell you." His sarcasm wasn't lost on Irina. "We're practical. The mission comes before the individual. So I've heard. Must be comforting to know you're so expendable." The words stung more than Irina wanted to admit. She had always accepted the Athali military doctrine without question. Individual sacrifice for collective success was honorable, necessary. But experiencing that sacrifice firsthand, being the one left behind, had shifted something in her perspective. "What about your people?" she countered. "You said yourself they think you're dead. Didn't even look for you." Darius laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, they looked. For about 6 hours. Standard search pattern for downed personnel. When they didn't find an immediate sign, they marked me Kia and moved on." Efficiency is the cornerstone of human military operations, too. He handed her a bowl of the strange stew he'd concocted. Seems like both our species have mastered the art of leaving people behind. They ate in silence for a while, the sound of rain filling the void between them. Eventually, Darius spoke again, his tone more serious. "Why did you join this war, Irina? What are you fighting for?" The question caught her off guard. No human had ever asked her that before. In battle, there were no questions, only enemies to defeat. "The Athali fight to protect what's ours," she answered automatically, reciting what felt like a line from a propaganda broadcast. "Humans encroached on territories we've held for generations. You brought weapons and mining operations to sacred worlds. Is that what they told you?" Darius asked, his eyes intent on hers. "It's the truth," Irina insisted, though a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. "Your species has always been expansionist, consuming resources without regard for consequences. And yours has always been isolationist, hoarding worlds you don't even use while developing weapons capable of destroying entire planetary systems." Darius set down his bowl. "Or at least, that's what my commanders told me." The familiar anger rose in Irina, the instinctive reaction to defend her people against human accusations. But as she opened her mouth to retort, she paused, struck by the mirror image they presented. Two soldiers fed opposing narratives, fighting a war whose true causes might be far removed from what either of them had been told. "What were you before the war?" she asked instead, changing the subject. Darius seemed surprised by the question. "A student, xenobiology and comparative cultural studies. I was going to be one of those academics who bridges the gap between species." He laughed sadly. "Ironic, right? Now I bridge the gap with weapons fire." "Why did you enlist?" "Didn't have much choice. When the war broke out, anyone with knowledge of Athali was considered a strategic asset. They drafted me, put me through accelerated officer training." He swirled the contents of his bowl thoughtfully. "What about you? Always been a military type?" Irina shook her head. "I was an engineer, specializing in environmental systems. When the conflict escalated, I volunteered. My family has a tradition of service." "An engineer," Darius repeated, glancing around at the shelter. "No wonder you understood the tech so quickly. I bet you could make this place 10 times more efficient." "It's already impressive," Irina admitted. "The way you've integrated the systems shows creativity." "High praise from an Athali," Darius said with a small smile. "Your people aren't exactly known for complimenting human ingenuity." Before Irina could respond, a sharp pain shot through her leg, causing her to gasp and drop her bowl. The stew splattered across the floor as she clutched at her thigh. Darius was beside her instantly, concern replacing their banter. "What's wrong?" The wound reopening. Irina gritted her teeth against the pain. "Something's not right. It feels like burning." Darius carefully removed the bandage, revealing the wound beneath. The edges were red and inflamed, with thin lines of darkness spreading outward through her silvery skin. "Infection," he muttered, his expression grim. "And not the standard kind. Something in the shrapnel must have carried a contaminant. Something your system can't handle." Irina looked down at her leg, understanding the severity immediately. Athali physiology was resilient against many threats, but certain Earth-based pathogens could be devastating. It explained the intense pain, the burning sensation. "How bad?" she asked, though she could read the answer in Darius's face. "Bad enough," he replied, already moving to gather supplies. "The healing compound helps with tissue regeneration, but it won't fight this kind of infection. You need something more targeted, something designed for Athali physiology." "There won't be anything like that here," Irina said, her voice tight with pain. "The nearest Athali medical facility would be at the base, and that's out of the question," Darius finished for her. "But there might be another option. The outpost where I found the power cell. It was a forward medical station, abandoned after a skirmish, but not completely looted. There might be something there we can use. You want to go back? It could be dangerous. Patrols, drones. More dangerous than sitting here watching you die from an infection." Darius was already packing a small bag with supplies. "I've managed to avoid detection for weeks. One more trip won't kill me." Probably. Irina watched him prepare, confused by his determination to help her. Why are you doing this? I'm still your enemy. Darius paused, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Are you? Right now, you're just a person in pain who needs help. Enemy is a label assigned by people who aren't here, fighting a war that doesn't make sense half the time. He checked his weapon, then headed for the door. Try to rest. Keep the wound elevated. I'll be back as soon as I can. Darius, Irina called as he reached the exit. When he turned, she struggled to find the right words. Be careful. A small smile touched his lips. Worried about me? That's progress. Next thing you know, we'll be exchanging friendship bracelets. With that, he sealed the door behind him, leaving Irina alone with her pain and her increasingly conflicted thoughts. The hours dragged by as Irina drifted in and out of consciousness. Fever making time itself seem distorted. She found herself reliving memories, training exercises in the mountains of her homeworld, her first space flight, the proud faces of her family when she received her commission. Interspersed with these were more recent images. Darius tending to her wound, the shared moment of tension as they hid from the drone, the strange comfort of their conversations. At some point, she became aware of the shelter door opening, of urgent movement around her. Darius's voice came as if from a great distance, edged with concern. Worse than I thought. The infection's spreading fast. Her eyes flickered open to see him leaning over her, his face tight with worry. He held something in his hand, a medical injector of some kind, filled with a bluish liquid. Found this, he explained, noticing her consciousness. It's an Othali broad-spectrum antibiotic, military grade. Should counter the infection, but I need to inject it directly into the wound site. Irina tried to focus, pushing through the fog of fever. How did you get past security? A wry smile crossed his face. Let's just say your people's encryption protocols could use some updating. Also, I may have borrowed your access codes from your wrist device. Sorry about that. Under normal circumstances, Irina would have been outraged at the invasion of privacy, the theft of secure military codes. Now, she could only feel a distant gratitude that his subterfuge might save her life. Do it, she managed to say, bracing herself for the pain. Darius nodded, positioning the injector over the infected wound. This is going to hurt. A lot. But I need you to stay still. Irina gripped the edges of her makeshift bed, nodding once. The pain when it came was beyond anything she had experienced before, like liquid fire being poured directly into her veins. She couldn't help the scream that tore from her throat, her body arching involuntarily against the agony. Darius held her down with one hand, his other steady as he emptied the injector into the wound. Almost done. Stay with me, Irina. Just a little more. The world went white with pain, then mercifully dark as consciousness fled. When Irina woke again, the burning in her leg had subsided to a dull throb. The shelter was dimly lit, the steady patter of rain still drumming on the roof. How much time had passed? Hours? Days? She turned her head to find Darius slumped in a chair beside her bed, asleep. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his clothes still damp from his expedition. As if sensing her gaze, he stirred, eyes opening to meet hers. Relief washed over his face when he saw her awake. Welcome back, he said, his voice rough with fatigue. How do you feel? Like I've been kicked by a war mount, Irina replied, her throat dry. But alive. Darius handed her a container of water. The infection is responding to the antibiotic. Your fever broke about 6 hours ago. Another day or two, and you should be able to move without reopening the wound. Irina drank gratefully, then studied him more carefully. You look terrible. A tired laugh escaped him. Thanks. Always nice to be appreciated. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Let's just say infiltrating an abandoned Othali medical station isn't as relaxing as it sounds. You risked a lot, Irina said quietly. What? The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to address. Darius shrugged, deflecting with humor, as he often did. Maybe I just hate eating alone. Or maybe I've developed a soft spot for grumpy Athali warriors who insult my appearance after I save their lives. But beneath the joke, Irina could see something else in his eyes, a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion, a loneliness that mirrored her own. "Thank you," she said simply. Darius nodded, accepting the gratitude without further comment. Then he stood, wincing slightly. "You should rest more. I need to check the perimeter. That storm's stirring up all kinds of electromagnetic interference. Good for hiding from drones, bad for knowing what's coming." As he moved toward the console, Irina noticed he was favoring his left side. "You're injured," she observed. Darius waved dismissively. "Just a scratch. Had a disagreement with a security drone on the way back. Nothing serious." Irina frowned. "Let me see." "It's fine. Let me see," she repeated, her tone leaving no room for argument. With a sigh, Darius lifted the edge of his shirt, revealing an angry red gash along his ribs. It wasn't deep, but it was clearly painful and at risk.